former book editor. How do you think the book industry has changed over the last 10, 15 years?
I have to say that the word former book editor is one of the saddest words that I know, because there's so many of us now. There's so many of the newspapers have dropped their book pages. I think I'm very proud of the St. Petersburg Times that after I retired they didn't. They still have 2 pages. But what is changing is both the way people are reading, in other words, the vehicle, and I think to some extent what they're reading, but mainly how they're reading, I think, is what's changing. We emphasize it, when book editors always covered the latest books, and they were tied into the publishing industry and bookstores and so on. And so I think there's one thing that's happening is people are kind of disassociating themselves with the usual traditional vehicles. And so they're looking for, people love books and they want to read. I really don't think that has ever changed. But they're looking for other ways of reading in an easier way. Younger people are very used to these handheld devices, and they see nothing wrong with reading on these devices. Old fogies still want the books, but the content is the same. They're still reading. So I'm happy about that.
Why do you think the papers have brought or gotten rid of their book review sections?
I really don't know, because I think that it's a big mistake. They say it's because they have no advertising for the book pages, which is true enough. The publishing industry is on the ropes. Bookstores don't advertise, but they don't have advertising in their sports sections either. So I think that their rationale is misplaced, because that is their client. That is their customer readers. So I've never understood why they didn't emphasize books and reading in their pages. Again, I think the St. Petersburg Times has always been ahead of the curve that way.
So you had mentioned these changes in technology. What does that mean, do you think, for smaller independent bookstores? How do they keep up?
Well, I think some of them are incorporating some of this. The smarter ones are. They're figuring out that they have to go with the flow. And I think there's going to be, in the future, books on demand in bookstores. People are going to come in and actually a book is going to be produced for them on the spot. It's already happened. The book industry is very old-fashioned. When the paperback came out, people said that was it. No one was going to read anymore, because the first paperbacks were really these dime novels, trashy novels, and they said, oh, this is the end of reading. Well, paperbacks was the beginning of mass democratic distribution of books. So I think all this alarmism is misplaced too. But you can understand it is a very old-fashioned industry. Someone once said that it's a 19th century industry living in a 22nd century world. It's kind of schizophrenic, and so some are adapting better than others. Obviously, some are, folding. Ones like Haslam's, I'm really happy to see, this huge warehouse, cavernous space still filled with books and still people coming. It's become a tourist destination for people. And I think you talk to Inkwood in Tampa, that's the other kind of model, which is a small, very personal, you get to know your customers, you call them up when a book comes, you hand sell them. Haslam's does that to some extent too, but Haslam has that aspect of used books, and this is another area, used books, self-published books, e-books, that are revolutionizing the way people read. But the vehicle, the way they read.
So some people I know that they've said with the closing of Borders and Barnes and Noble's not doing very well, that this is just kind of almost the end of bookstores, because people, and what they're saying the reason being is because people aren't reading like they used to. Do you find
well,
that
here I
true?
find this funny, because when these mega stores came on the scene, they also predicted the end of reading. They said, oh, these mega stores will shut down reading and independent stores will be driven out of business. Now, the independent stores got together and they created the ABA. They did a lot of very innovative things to try to stay alive. Not all of them made it. Some people are cheering the end of the mega bookstores. I happen to like them because they did a lot of activities in towns. They had a lot of book signings. They were really very active in the community. And to me, that's the key, is getting involved with people and bringing them in for various other reasons, not just expecting them to wander by to read a book. Because it's easier to sit at your computer and order a book on Amazon. But if you have a reason to come to a bookstore because you're going to meet other readers, or you're a writer, and these are communities that overlap, people who write and people who read. This is why the self-publishing industry now is becoming so popular and flourishing, and why Amazon is getting involved in it, or why they have for a while now, why Barnes and Noble is going to start doing it. They're starting to publish their own books because they're starting to understand there's a connection between people who want to read, people who want to write, and people who obviously want to publish in all its forms. So I think that the successful ones have understood that they have to draw the community in. And you have to have the destination. A bookstore has to be a destination, not just to buy a book, because they can do that easier online. It has to be for other reasons.
And as a person who has founded a book festival, can you tell me about that process and what role do you think these book festivals have?
Well, I think that, here's what I thought about the book festival way back then, is that I had gone to the Miami Book Festival, and this was in the 90s, the early 90s, and I just was amazed because it was so much fun, and, here were my people all gathered together. And so I said, why can't we do this? And I asked the publishers, why do you send authors to certain places and not others? And they said, because there are these places that have these book festivals. So I kept saying, why not us? So we started this book festival. And the first time we held it, we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, we just asked authors to come. We had some really big names. Betty Friedan came to our first book festival. And thousands of people showed up. I mean, we really didn't expect so many people to show up. But I think there was this need, again, like I'm saying, for people to reach other people. That's why you have book clubs. And what I find interesting, people keep saying people don't read. And their proof of that is that book sales have gone down. But ebook sales have gone up. Amazon is one of the biggest purveyors of anything on the net. Book clubs have flourished. Men are starting to form book clubs, which was never true. Book clubs are as old as the first book clubs in America were formed by black slaves who secretly got together and to teach each other to read. It's a very old tradition in America to get together and read books. And I just don't think that's dead. I really think that when you look at this, you're looking at it through the optic of the publishing industry, which is groping around for its feet, like the newspaper industry. They're in trouble, but I don't think that they're in trouble because people have stopped reading. I don't believe that.
So what do you think the future holds for them?
Well, I think, as I said, they have to adapt. And I do think that what the industries that are going to do best are the industries that tap into the community needs, that don't just get obsessed with the latest book. I think that's why used bookstores are becoming very popular, like the used clothing stores. People are starting to realize, well, we don't have to have the latest. We can, we're frugal and we're going to look for the most interesting. So I think you have a lot of used bookstores cropping up. That I think that's an interesting phenomenon. And like I said, you have a lot of people who are self-publishing, and selling the books in a very non-traditional way. They're not published by traditional publishers, so they don't have the usual route. I gave the last Festival of Reading, they invited me back to give a lecture about self-publishing, and the room was filled. And I don't think that was my popularity. I think it was the popularity of people really are hungry to know, how do you self-publish? What are all the pitfalls of doing that? Once you self-publish, how do you deliver and distribute the book? That used to be something that was set up by these traditional publishers, and you had to beg them to publish you. That's all changed. And you have people. The book I self-published, which was a collection of my mother's writings, she was 86 when she first wrote a column for the St. Petersburg Times, and they invited her to write a regular column. She wrote from age 86 to 93 when she died. And I put together a collection of her work, and I published it under Amazon. And it sold better than the book I published, my own published book, because people really related to the topic, and I sold it in very odd venues. I went to art galleries. I went to a There's in nearby Gulfport, they have an art walk every month, and I sat in front of a used bookstore, and I sold $100 worth of this book because people stopped by and they were drawn by this story of this woman who had success, creative success late in life. So it's the topic now that draws people, and with the internet, you don't have to rely on publishers. If you can figure out ways to, and I'm not clever enough to do this, but to create a video that touts your book, to get on all the social networking to tell people about your book, people are bypassing the traditional publisher. So, in other words, stories are still being told. People are still reading those stories. That is what books are. They're stories, and the people are telling other people, either fiction or nonfiction. That's still happening, and it's actually happening, I think, at a greater level than ever.